Okay, we'll cover the fuel oil service system now. The difference between the fuel oil service system and the transfer system is now we are going to talk about the piping system and the filters and everything that covers the fuel from the service or day tank to delivering it to the engines. Okay, the safety hazards for inspecting the fuel service system are your basic PPE that anybody would use. And since we will also be checking for leaks, you might also want to wear safety gloves as well so you don't get your skin exposed to it. Okay, for this vessel's service or day tank, here's the filling line with the filling valve that comes directly from the fuel transfer system. So the fuel goes into the tank here, and here is the sight glass to monitor the level as it comes up. Now notice on sight glass requirements, since it's made of glass, we always want to make sure that it has the protective barriers here to ensure that nobody bumps into and breaks the glass and that fuel spills. Also, sight glasses must also be able to be isolated in case the glass does break. Now I will talk about the main strainers and water separators, as well as the primary fuel filter system of about 10 microns. The fuel line, the fuel piping system comes up. Here is the valve that is required by regulations, that is the cutoff isolation valve closest to the engine itself. These are the strainers that separate heavy sediments and does the water separation. From here it goes to the main, called the primary fuel filter system. It's usually 10 microns. And then from there, it will go over to the engine from this valve, the cutoff valve we spoke of, through this flexible non-metallic hose. The flexible non-metallic hoses are covered in detail during the fuel transfer system video. Okay, from the day/service tank, here's the suction point at the low portion of the tank. This is the valve closest to the tank and the valve that can be closed remotely in an emergency should the need to close it to isolate a fuel source during a fire. This pipe right here is nothing more than the protection that holds the cable that runs through it, where up on deck, someone could pull this cable and remotely close that valve in an emergency. The piping comes out of the tank and goes through what the crew refers to as the pot, the initial strainer separator. From out of the pot is the 2-inch piping system that goes and cross connects to the starboard side of the engine room and the fuel delivery from the tank on that side. Here's the 2-inch crossover line. It may be hard to see, but straight out of the bottom of this 2-inch pipe is a 1-inch pipe that 90s and goes this way. From here, it goes towards the aft end of the engine, under the engine, and comes up over at the primary and fuel filters and coalescers strainers that we just showed earlier. One of the tests we may have to do is to verify power-operated valve configurations on other fuel oil service and transfer systems. On larger vessels than this, we may have these kind of valves that are actuated by actuators that will either be pneumatic in nature or hydraulic operated, or sometimes even electric servo motor operated valves. So when you encounter these kind of valves, the inspection point is to inspect the actuator and ensure that it is in good condition and looks like it still functions, because those many times become steps in machinery spaces and get damaged because people walk on them. Okay, when you're verifying the flanges and metallic joints in the service piping system, you can refer back to the fuel transfer piping system lesson because it will be the same. Additionally, you could refer to the fuel transfer piping lesson for information about the non-flexible hoses or non-metallic flexible fuel hoses. Common questions or concerns when inspecting fuel piping systems are when you encounter leaks. We usually like to try to qualify leaks into 3 different branches. The most dangerous kind of leak is the atomizing or spraying leak that is highly flammable should it come into contact with an ignition source. I also like to qualify another kind of leak is when it's just dripping. And if you are writing a requirement for a fuel leak that is dripping, try to guess the drip rate if you can as an estimate. And then the least dangerous type of fuel leak is when it's just weeping out of either a corroded point on the pipe or through at a connection point. So when you write your deficiencies on these, you may want to qualify the type of leak in those terms and let your verifying officer help you determine what level of control action and how long you're going to give them to correct this deficiency. To summarize the fuel oil service system, the hazards that we may encounter while we're looking for leaks on this piping system are obviously getting it on our exposed skin, and keep in mind that we may be inspecting this system while the engines are running. So be watching out for rotating machinery. Okay, the topics we covered today, we examined the piping arrangements, the heating and coil arrangement for fuels that require heating. We examined the fill pipe arrangements. We also verified the manual control valve arrangements, power operated valve configurations. We verified the tank piping and valves locations. We verified the flange mechanical joints have suitable shields. That was also covered in the fuel transfer piping lesson, as well as the non-metallic flexible hose and fittings was covered in the transfer lesson. We verified all the valve arrangements, and we inspected and looked at the filter assemblies. That was a lot of information. So if in the future you have questions or you want to need help in drafting the deficiencies, contact the verifying officer at your local unit.